Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly livestock market update. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Megan Grebner with this as always to talk all things markets. University of Missouri, Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
Kind of an interesting Friday. We're going to talk cattle on feed. We're going to talk hogs and pigs. We've got cold storage numbers. We have livestock slaughter numbers. All of that's coming up. But before we get going, let's recap what happened this week on what was a pretty decent week, at least for the most part, in livestock markets.
Yeah, if we start on the cattle side this week, Megan, live fed cattle were $2.40 higher this week. Those feeder cattle auctions were anywhere from $2 to $5 higher this week. The February live cattle futures contract was down $1.15. The January feeder cattle futures contract was up $1.70. If we look at box beef, choice box beef was down $1.70 this week. That leaves choice box beef prices about $24 above where they were a year ago. Ribs and loins were really what drug down that choice box beef price this week. On the hog side, cash barrels and gilts were 40 cents lower this week. The February lean hog futures contract closed down 30 cents. We also lost $2.20 on the pork cutout value. Bellies and hams and ribs were all lower this week.
It really was interesting watching the cattle markets specifically as we're seeing a little bit stronger business on both the future side. There was some higher, better sale barn activity this week, and it's a nice break from what's been, I think, a pretty heavy couple of weeks on the cattle market.
That it is nice to see some positives, that's for sure.
All right, let's talk weekly slaughter. Heading into a long holiday weekend, I thought maybe we'd be a little bit slower than we were, but we weren't as slow as I thought we were going to be.
Yeah, so we are down a little bit, but yeah, maybe not as much as we would have thought. So USDA saying for the week ending December 23rd, a run of 621,000 head of cattle this week. That's 28,000 less than a week ago, but 69,000 more than where we were a year ago. And on the hog side, a run of 2.426 million head this week. That is 256,000 head less than a week ago, but 643,000 more than the shortened week a year ago.
When we take a look at those year-over-year numbers, this is kind of coming to the end of the line for us about how are we going to end up in 2023.
Yeah, so we're down 4.2% in terms of cattle slaughter year to date and 2.1% higher on the hog side of the equation.
All right, let's get into let's get into reports. We'll start with cattle on feed numbers. As you take a look at those numbers for December 1, what do you got?
Yeah, so an interesting mix here of maybe a little bit of bearish news out of cattle on feed. When you look at December 1 on feed inventories, 2.7% above last year's level, right at 12 million head on feed. That does go right outside the upper end of the pre-report estimate. It was at 102.5 at the upper end, so 2/10 outside. November placements, 1.868 million head. That was 2% below year ago levels. It's at the upper end of the pre-report estimates. So the average pre-report estimate was 96.2. So still heavy. Maybe not too much different than we would have anticipated pre-report wise.
When you look at these numbers, what is your takeaway? Because we're still placing a fair amount of cattle, and we still have a fair amount on feed.
Yeah, so I think, well, so number one, imports matter in this discussion. We are seeing pretty heavy imports, which is not surprising when we've talked about record or near record prices to see cattle moving into the U.S. to try to fill feedlots. I think that we have pulled cattle forward here still. So potentially we can still get tight as we get into early 2024. I guess for me, this reminds us that It'll probably take us a few months to work through kind of current supplies, and maybe we tighten up as we look further into 2024. But maybe not a lot of additional strength on the price side here for a period of time.
Do you want to go into hogs and pigs, or do you want to bring in livestock slaughter after this? All right. Let's talk livestock slaughter next, just because we can tie in that beef cow slaughter number as well. So as you take a look at livestock slaughter, beef production was down. And that's not the same story for pork production.
Yeah, that's right. So we dropped 5.8% in November of 23 relative to year ago levels. 2.3 billion pounds of beef produced. Cattle slaughter in total down 6.1% for November. Beef cows. All right. So we've talked about bigger cuts in beef cow slaughter earlier in the year, but November of 23 was down just 0.8% relative to November of 2022. Which actually tells me we're accelerating beef cow slaughter a little bit as we've gone further into 2023, which maybe that's the positive news we have for Christmas presents under the tree, as that cow herd could be even less than maybe some of us have been estimating when we get to the January 1 inventory report. On the pork side, pork production, 2.4 billion pounds of pork. That's 1.6% above year ago levels. Again, hog slaughter up 2% in November. Hog dress weight's down slightly, helped offset a little bit of the increase in hog slaughter. Year to date, just to close out here, beef production down 5%, pork production up 0.8%.
The hog numbers are really interesting when I was looking at that yesterday too, just seeing how much more we're slaughtering in general. And that kind of takes us into our quarterly hogs and pigs report, which also came out this afternoon. Let's start on a positive note, and we can work our way through the rest of those numbers.
Yeah, so you and I are talking about this 30 minutes after the report drops. So I'll remind us that there's a lot of historical revisions to think through as well that maybe we won't get a lot of time to spend today. But the positive, 6 million head of breeding inventory, 3.3% below year ago levels. That is well outside the range of pre-report estimates. The low end was at 98.3. So that is the positive news. When you look at it, all right, so just briefly what I found, Oklahoma down 100,000 head, Iowa down 60, Texas down 30, Illinois, North Dakota, Colorado, each down 20,000 head in terms of breeding inventory.
Where did Missouri end up in there? Did you look?
Unchanged relative to a year ago was the Missouri numbers. I expected them to be down, but in fact, unchanged over the year.
So there's the positive note, but there's also some other figures in the quarterly hogs and pigs report that don't tell such a positive story in these numbers. Specifically, it reminds us that we're really efficient when it comes to raising hogs.
Whoa, productivity's gotten back on track, Megan, after taking a little hiatus. Now we got 3 quarters in a row here to talk about pigs per litter. USDA told us 11.66 pigs per litter for Sep through November. That's 3.9% above same period a year ago and outside the upper end of the pre-report estimates. That upper end was at 103.7. So more pigs. Pig crop, as a result of that, basically unchanged Sep through November from year ago levels. That also fell outside the upper end. So maybe some not so good news on that productivity side out of the report.
At a time where we're seeing some demand struggles domestically, it really is a time where we don't need to be as efficient. And we're just showing people that we sure know how to raise hogs.
So it reminds me to say, so a lot of things going on, but as we cut or don't build on breeding inventory as fast. We become more productive. I think we've been culling the lowest performers, and it certainly shows up in things like pigs per litter. And those are the things that continue to happen that takes us longer to get adjusted to where demand seems to be in the pork industry today.
All right, let's get into this cold storage number. As we take a look at cold storage figures, there's definitely some interesting numbers compared to year ago levels on both beef and pork.
Yeah, so certainly tighter relative to a year ago. We start on the beef side. The end of November freezer stocks, 455 million pounds of beef. That was 2% above where we were at the end of October, but 87% of where we were a year ago. On the pork side, 416 million pounds of pork in freezers. That's 95% of last month and 92% of a year ago. So shorter on the pork side. We did see a little bit of rebuilding, Megan, in bellies relative to what was fairly tight numbers in October. So maybe that's still lower bacon prices for you as we look ahead.
Was it, if I think I read that statistic right, 67% more pork bellies in stock compared to last month?
Yeah, yes. So I think you're correct in that. So those stocks are very volatile, been very volatile, been very low. I don't want to put too much stock, but we certainly built substantially higher stocks of bellies relative to the very, very low level of October.
And we were still down year over year, which comes back to your point. It's very volatile and it changes a lot. But I saw this 67% today and I was like, wow. We'll see where we are in a month, right?
That's right.
All right. As you take away, just you kind of look at everything today. I feel like the word for 2023, when we've talked about markets in general, has been volatility. I feel like this set of reports for December, as we head into 2024, that's not going to change much.
So I agree. I think when you look at what we have on the cattle side, less bearish than maybe the last couple of reports, but still plenty of cattle on feed here. And when you look at the pork side of the equation, although we've got breeding inventory under control, productivity's almost offset that. One I look at here, hogs greater than 180 pounds, 2.4% above where we were a year ago. That could be short-term negative on the hog side of the equation. So we'll wait and see, but more volatility is certainly likely as we look into 2024.
Scott, I'm getting a set of reports like this on a Friday going into a long holiday weekend. Does that give the markets time to just kind of like reset and we're not going to see such a volatile or shocking reaction when we reopen Tuesday morning?
So perhaps, but I don't think it'll take long for markets to get this information in. Maybe some are not going to be trading next week quite as hard as they would the remaining weeks of the year, but I am curious to see where markets go on Tuesday, but both for hogs and cattle. I have a hunch we could talk about some lower markets as we look next week.
Definitely it'll be interesting to see how things reopen on Tuesday morning. It's kind of a slow week next week, especially compared to this week. Restaurant performance is out. What are you paying attention to in that report as we round out 2023?
Yeah, so it seems like we've been getting a lot of good news on the general economy side of the equation of late, and I expect we might see that in this restaurant performance index report as well. So perhaps some positive demand signals to help us out as we finish 2023.
Lord knows we need it. Scott, it is great to see you. Have a very Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. I actually won't see you next week. We're going to be adventuring. So have a happy new year and we'll talk to you in 2024.
That sounds good, Megan.
So for our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning, go to brownfieldagnews.com. You can also submit questions and comments. And for updates on what happens in the commodity markets daily, make sure to check out John Perkins' Market Minute. Have a very Merry Christmas. Have a Happy New Year as well. I'm Megan Grubner for Brownfield. Thank you for tuning in to our YouTube channel. For all the latest in ag news, markets, and weather, and for more great video content, go to brownfieldagnews.com.